Imagine discovering, like out of nowhere, that your entire global company has legally lost the ability to issue
It's
invoices.
completely shut down.
Exactly. You literally cannot collect payments. Revenue has it's hit a brick wall. And the craziest part about this scenario, it's not because of, a catastrophic market crash or some big legal injunction.
Right. No, it's from a highly successful IT upgrade.
Yeah, a
Oh,
perfectly routine IT upgrade.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore this massive, honestly, largely hidden crisis in corporate governance.
It really is hidden, yeah.
We're unpacking a critical situation in the corporate world right now where these fundamental technology decisions are basically being made by the exact wrong people. We're looking at how tax systems are being built and why the current approach is setting up massive organizations for just absolute catastrophic failure. It's a phenomenal topic, honestly, because it's happening entirely under the radar. Like right now, today, in IT departments across global enterprises, these technology decisions are being finalized that will, completely define a company's compliance capability for the next decade.
Wow, a decade.
Yeah, easily a decade. And the fundamental flaw here is that IT teams are designing these systems based on what IT inherently values.
Right, like bandwidth and stuff.
Exactly. They're prioritizing um, technical integration, system performance, bandwidth, maybe a really slick user interface, but they are not building them based on regulatory completeness and accuracy.
Which, brings us to the core thesis of our deep dive today. Even if you, as a listener, don't work in tax, and maybe you don't work in IT either, this scenario is an absolute masterclass in cross-departmental misalignment.
Oh, totally.
It's like the ultimate case study of what happens when domain expertise just does not match operational design. And the critical distinction to keep in mind, as we unpack this today, is quite simple. These are not IT decisions with tax implications. They are tax decisions with IT implementations.
And that framing changes everything. I mean, if you
Yes.
view a system upgrade as an IT decision, you let the engineers run with it,
Yeah.
right? And then you just ask the tax department to sign off at the very end.
It's a little rubber stamp.
Exactly, rubber stamp.
Yeah.
But if it is a tax decision, the subject matter experts need to be holding the pen from day one. To really understand why this misalignment is suddenly a ticking time bomb, we have to look at how compliance used to work versus how it works today.
As there's been a shift, right?
A massive shift. The fundamental rules of global commerce have completely changed.
Right. So let's unpack that shift because this misalignment between IT and tax, it isn't just like a minor inefficiency anymore. Historically, companies operated on what we'd call a periodic compliance model.
Right. And in that old periodic model, errors were entirely recoverable. A company would process thousands of transactions over the course of a month or a quarter.
Mm.
The accounting team would gather all that data, run their spreadsheets, prepare a filing, and then they had this review window. They could literally sit in a conference room, double-check the numbers, catch anomalies, and fix them before sending anything to the government.
So worst case scenario, if an error slipped through, the regulatory consequence was just like a delayed filing or a fine. It was essentially just an audit risk. You fixed it after the fact.
Exactly. You always had time to fix it.
Okay, so let's unpack this for the listener. The old way was essentially like writing a term paper, right?
Mm.
You draft it, you have time to proofread it, maybe you run it through a spell checker, hand it to a friend to read, and then you hand it in.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But the new model, continuous transaction control, or CTC, is a completely different universe. To use an analogy, the new CTC model is like doing live improv on a very public stage.
I like that.
Right. The second the words leave your mouth, they are part of the show. There is absolutely no review window. If you mess up, the scene just crashes instantly in front of the whole audience.
That live improv analogy perfectly captures the stakes. In a CTC reality, the transaction is submitted to the government the exact moment it is generated.
Wow, literally the exact moment.
Literally. There is no end-of-month review.
Yeah.
The compliance logic that is physically embedded in your IT architecture is determining, in real time, whether your organization can legally issue that invoice, put goods on a truck, and, collect payment.
So the government is essentially sitting right inside your data stream.
Exactly. So a tax decision implemented incorrectly in a CTC environment is no longer just an audit risk. It is an immediate operational disruption.
Right, and let's visualize that operational disruption for a second. Because we aren't talking about a tax penalty arriving in the mail like 6 months later. We are talking about shipping containers physically sitting on a dock, unable to be loaded onto a cargo ship.
Yeah, because the real-time API connection to the local government rejected the digital invoice. The supply chain just freezes.
It's terrifying. And because of this unforgiving, real-time improv reality, the foundational decisions of how a system is built become a matter of life and death for the business. Which brings us to the first of two massive governance decisions. Where does the tax logic actually live?
Right, and this is perhaps the most fundamental technology decision an organization makes today. You basically have two paths. Do you embed the tax logic deep inside the enterprise resource planning system, the ERP core?
Like writing bespoke code directly into the system?
Yes, using custom configurations, creating country-specific modifications right in the core.
Yeah.
Or the other path, do you keep the tax logic entirely outside the ERP, housing it in a dedicated compliance platform that connects back to your main system via standard APIs?
Okay, look, I'm going to put on my chief financial officer hat for a second here.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I just spent, I don't know, $50 million implementing a state-of-the-art ERP system from SAP or Oracle to run my entire global company. It is the central nervous system of my business.
Right.
Now you're telling me I need to bolt on a whole separate external platform just for tax? That sounds like unnecessary IT bloat. I mean, why can't my multi-million-dollar ERP handle a few changing tax codes? Why not just build it inside the house I already own?
It is a very common CFO reaction,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. And it's exactly why IT naturally defaults to that inside option. It feels technically simpler and organizationally familiar.
It seems like it would be cheaper, too.
It seems that way. But embedding tax logic into the core of your ERP is a massive compliance liability for one simple reason. ERPs are designed for stability, not agility.
Ah, okay.
Tax regulations change constantly and unpredictably. When you hard code those incredibly specific, constantly fluctuating tax rules into the core engine that runs your whole company, you create a total nightmare.
Because every single time a government in, like, any country you operate in changes a rule, it forces a complex, expensive ERP development project.
Exactly. So you are essentially tying the speed of your global compliance to the speed of your IT department's upgrade cycle.
Yeah.
And, well, IT departments are not exactly known for pivoting on a dime.
Not at all.
No. And it creates what we call an upgrade barrier. IT might want to roll out a major security patch or performance upgrade to the ERP, but they can't.
Because it might break the tax code?
Yes. Doing an upgrade might break the delicate, custom-coded tax logic they welded into the system for operations in, say, Brazil or Spain. You end up conflating the ERP's primary job, which is processing high-volume transactions efficiently, with the job of being a hyper-local regulatory interface.
So the outside option avoids all of this.
Completely. It keeps the ERP clean.
And by clean, you mean the ERP just focuses on moving the data from point A to point B without having to understand the tax implications of that data, right?
Yeah, exactly. You externalize the tax logic into a dedicated platform using standard APIs, which are basically just universal plug-and-play translators.
Right.
So when new mandates drop or a country changes its tax rate, updating the system becomes a mere configuration task within the external tax platform. It's not a massive software development project inside the ERP anymore. The ERP stays fast and stable, and the compliance platform adapts at the pace the regulatory environment actually demands.
Okay, so pulling the tax logic out of the core ERP makes total sense. But that external tax engine still needs to be fed the right ingredient to do its job, right? Like, you can't calculate Italian tax if the raw data it receives doesn't even have the fields the Italian government requires.
Bingo.
Which brings us to the second core decision, the canonical data model. And this is where the granular reality of global business gets incredibly messy.
It really does. So the canonical data model is the organization-wide blueprint for how financial and operational data is structured. It defines exactly what information every single transaction record contains, no matter where in the world it originates.
Okay.
Now, when IT builds this standardized model, their goal is uniformity. They want every invoice to look exactly the same from a data architecture perspective, because that makes the system run blazingly fast.
Makes sense.
But if IT builds this model without deep, authoritative input from the tax department, disaster strikes.
Right. Let's walk through a real-world scenario of that disaster. So IT builds this beautiful, uniform, highly efficient central data model. They are thrilled. But wait, Italy's Fattura system requires highly specific partner validation elements to be included on the invoice.
Right.
And then Poland's KSEF mandate requires totally different operational fields. Saudi Arabia's ZATCA system has its own unique cryptographic validation requirements, and France is, rolling out a whole new set of mandates.
And this is exactly where the blind spot becomes critical. If the central canonical data model lacks the capacity to capture those specific hyperlocal fields, the system will just fail.
Even if IT thinks it works.
Exactly. The IT department might look at a transaction routed through their beautiful new architecture and say, hey, it's structurally compliant with our internal corporate format. The data moved perfectly.
But the tax department looks at it and says what?
The tax department will look at the exact same transaction and say it is substantively illegal in 4 different countries.
Because the data arrived incredibly fast, but it was just the wrong data.
Yeah, it's a classic case of efficiency over effectiveness. The global head of tax is the one who actually understands those specific requirements, the mandatory fields, the local formats, the business partner validations.
So defining those parameters is work that ultimately results in an IT deliverable, like a data blueprint, but it is substantively a tax deliverable.
Exactly. And if the tax team delegates the specification of that model entirely to IT, those glaring compliance gaps simply won't be discovered until the system is fully live and transactions are literally bouncing back from government servers. Yeah. And trying to re-architect a foundational data model after it is live across a global enterprise is mind-bogglingly expensive.
Okay, so we have the architecture externalized, and let's say we even manage to get the data model localized and correct. We still have a massive blind spot here, don't we? Testing and vendor selection.
Yes, we do.
Because having the perfect blueprint is absolutely useless if you don't validate it properly. Or, if the technology vendor you bought the solution from is basically selling you smoke and mirrors. So let's start with testing.
Testing perfectly illustrates the cultural chasm between these two departments. IT tests the system to see if it functions as designed. They run test scripts to answer questions like, does the data move from the ERP to the API without crashing? Is the latency under 2 milliseconds?
Right, technical checks.
But the tax function has an entirely different mandate. Tax must test if the system is actually correct against regulatory requirements. They aren't testing against a technical specification sheet written by an IT project manager. They are testing against the actual translated letter of the law.
And the friction there just seems inevitable because the government doesn't care about your IT department's agile sprint schedule, right?
No, they definitely don't.
Like if a new tax rate goes live on January 1st, it goes live on January 1st.
But that is the exact friction point. As tax rates and electronic filing formats constantly change, the process of translating regulatory text into a system specification is often driven by IT's capacity to do the coding work rather than the government's regulatory deadline.
So IT might say, we can put that update in the Q3 release, but the government mandate actually starts in Q2.
Exactly.
Which means for an entire quarter, the company is basically operating illegally.
Yep.
That is terrifying. But wait, what if the company is buying an off-the-shelf solution? That leads us to the vendor assessment process, which I find absolutely fascinating. Because when a massive organization puts out a request for proposal, an RFP for a new software system, IT is usually driving the bus.
Almost always.
They are rigorous about evaluating the user interface, system uptime, cloud security protocols, and the vendor's implementation track record. But they really only superficially check for regulatory completeness.
That's so true. A vendor will respond to the RFP and claim, yes, our software has coverage for mandates in Italy, Poland, and Saudi Arabia. And the standard IT assessment simply takes that claim at face value. They check a box and move on.
And that's the vulnerability.
It's a critical vulnerability. Tax leadership must step in and ask very hard, very specific questions entirely independently of whatever IT is evaluating.
Okay, give me an example of the kind of question that breaks that vendor illusion.
Well, you have to ask about the mechanics of their regulatory updates. How is the vendor's regulatory content actually maintained behind the scenes? What is the guaranteed maximum lag time between a foreign government announcing a change to a data format and the vendor pushing that update live to their platform?
Oh, I see. Because if the government says go, and the vendor's development team needs 6 months to write and test the new code, the vendor still gets paid, but you are the one failing compliance audits.
Exactly. Another thing to dig into is the vendor's true coverage model. This is the difference between a vendor genuinely building technology and a vendor just like playing telephone.
Playing telephone.
Yeah, like, are they writing native code for each of these global jurisdictions? Or are they just acting as an aggregator?
The aggregator model. I mean, why is that bad? It sounds like they're just leveraging local expertise.
It sounds good on paper, But the aggregator model is a massive hidden risk. An aggregator is essentially a vendor that builds a really slick unified dashboard, but behind the scenes, they are just subcontracting out to dozens of smaller local technology providers in each country. They just route your data through a middleman.
Okay, so what's the actual operational problem there?
It's because of latency, accountability, and cascading failure. Every time your data hops from your ERP to the aggregator's platform, to the local subcontractor's platform, and finally to the government, you add points of failure.
Ah, more hops, more problems.
Exactly. And more importantly, when a transaction inevitably breaks, say, the Saudi Arabian government rejects an invoice, who fixes it? The aggregator blames the local provider blames the aggregator, and meanwhile, your entire supply chain is just stalled.
So you are left holding the bag while your vendors just point fingers at each other.
Yep.
Which ties directly into another critical question. What is the error resolution architecture? Like, if a submission is rejected by a government API, what does the platform actually show the user?
Right. Does it just flash a generic error 404, submission failed,
Yeah.
leaving your billing clerks totally blind?
Right.
Or does it provide the specific localized rejection reason, offer actionable corrective guidance in the user's language, and provide a seamless way to correct the data and resubmit without having to back out the entire transaction in the ERP?
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. And without tax experts actively interrogating vendors on these hyper-specific workflows, you end up with systems that look great on an IT scorecard, but just completely fail in the real world.
There is a line from our sources today that perfectly summarizes this whole crisis. Let me read it. Tax technology decisions made by IT without adequate tax governance are technical successes with compliance failures waiting to be discovered.
It is a chilling reality for any corporate leader, honestly. A system can be deployed on time, under budget, and run at lightning speed. A total technical success, right?
Right.
While simultaneously generating millions of dollars in compliance liabilities because it is structurally incapable of meeting local legal mandates.
Okay, so we have thoroughly established the catastrophe of IT flying blind. We know the architecture decisions have to keep the core clean, the canonical data model has to be localized with tax input, and vendors need to be aggressively interrogated by subject matter experts.
All of that, yes.
So the million-dollar question is, how does the tax team actually take the wheel without starting a massive internal turf war with IT?
Well, it requires the tax function to evolve. They cannot just sit back, wait for IT to bring them a finished product, and then critique it. They have to proactively build a very specific type of capability within their own ranks.
What kind of capability?
You need to develop tax professionals who are deeply tech literate. We're talking about hybrid roles. You need tax experts who can sit in an engineering meeting and actually understand what a canonical data model is.
So they need to speak the language.
Exactly. They need to understand the...
So it has to come from the top.
Yes. The global head of tax has to sit down with the CIO and the CFO, the person who actually signs the checks, and explicitly negotiate for shared governance over these specific architectural decisions.
It has to be completely baked into the corporate structure.
Exactly. It means institutionalizing the relationship, setting up regular mandatory tax and IT architecture review boards. It requires establishing systematic regulatory monitoring processes within the tax team that feed directly into IT's technology roadmap, so IT isn't caught off guard by, say, a new mandate in France.
Makes sense.
And above all, it requires absolute executive sponsorship to enforce a hard rule. No financial compliance architecture moves to the build phase, let alone goes live, without formal tax sign-off.
Which realistically sounds like a tremendous amount of upfront work and a significant ongoing financial investment to staff these hybrid roles and run these review boards.
It is a serious investment.
Yeah.
But compared to the alternative, the cost of building this cross-functional capability is a microscopic fraction of the compounding cost of a structurally flawed architecture.
Because of the constant fixes.
Yeah. If you let IT embed tax logic in the core ERP to save money today, every single regulatory change for the next 10 years becomes an expensive emergency IT intervention. If your data model is built missing critical regional fields, every time your company expands into a new country, it requires a massive, panicked data remediation effort.
So it just bleeds you dry over time.
Exactly. The cost of leaving these decisions entirely to IT accumulates year after year, slowly bleeding the company's operational budget.
Wow. Bringing this all back to you, the listener, whether you are deep in the weeds of corporate tax, whether you are an IT architect building these massive systems, or whether you are just fascinated by how global organizations actually function behind the curtain, the ultimate lesson here is universal.
It really applies everywhere.
It's about matching domain expertise with operational design. When critical business systems are built without the right experts in the very first design meetings, those systems aren't just flawed, they are literally designed to fail from day one.
And I want to leave you with a thought about the sheer scale of where this is all heading. Think about the compounding nature of these continuous transaction control mandates we discussed earlier.
The live improv reality.
Right. Global jurisdictions are not loosening their grip. They are continuously tightening their digital frameworks. Every single year, more countries are abandoning periodic reporting and demanding real-time, invoice-by-invoice data integration directly into their government servers.
So the net is closing.
The net is closing rapidly. So what is the ultimate end game for global business? Imagine a scenario where a massive multinational corporation relies on a tightly woven, internally built IT-driven ERP system. What happens when a major regulatory body in a key market decides to completely overhaul its required data model and offers zero grace period for implementation?
I mean, complete operational gridlock. Invoices stop, trucks stop, revenue stops.
Exactly. Governments around the world now hold the literal digital on-off switch to a corporation's revenue stream via these real-time API connections, which raises a fascinating question about corporate power dynamics.
Oh, how so?
Well, if the tax department is the only group that truly understands how to keep those government APIs happy and the revenue flowing, do corporate tax departments essentially become the most critical operational fail-safes in modern business?
Wow.
If they hold the keys to the company's very ability to transact, are they suddenly more operationally vital than even the CEO? It is a profound shift in how we value expertise, and something really interesting to chew on as you navigate the technology systems in your own industry.
It really is. It makes you realize that the most dangerous threat to a modern enterprise isn't necessarily a sophisticated hacker or a sudden market crash. It's that perfectly routine, highly praised IT upgrade that quietly, efficiently, and flawlessly turns off your company's legal ability to make a dime. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.